Good morning. In ancient days, truth was never given to the masses, to the public. Going back into the very first place where religion appeared on the face of the earth, that was India, there sprung up a system of ashramas, temples, which we call convents for women or monasteries for men. And there, people of religious bent would go and study. Now, of course, in those days there were no printing presses, so there were no books. And there were only two means of teaching spiritual works, and that was either through word of mouth and later through manuscripts. Before the days of manuscripts, there were some carvings on stone, but you can imagine how little that would be, because you know how little could be carved on stone in the way of a message. But there are still stones in existence with spiritual messages carved on them. But a wider spread of religious teaching came when manuscripts came into being, and a group of people grew up called scribes who could write. Now, in those days, you must remember that it was very rare to find a person who could write or read. And one reason for that, aside from the fact that there were no schools in those days, was the fact that there was also no alphabet. The alphabet was only discovered or brought into existence around 550 B.C. It came into existence simultaneously in the Holy Lands in the Hebrew alphabet, and in India in the Sanskrit alphabet. But that is the beginning of alphabets. And of course, with alphabets, writing became an easier thing. Before that time, Hebrew manuscripts had no vowels and no punctuation. And so each scholar took his manuscript and put in the vowels according to his own understanding, and of course he also punctuated it according to the meaning that he got from it, which may not have been the original meaning. Mr. Lamsa shows what complications can arise in an experience of that kind when he reinterprets the passage in Scripture about a camel going through the eye of a needle or not being able to go through the eye of a needle, and he points out that in translating originally they forgot two dots over one letter. If those two dots had been there, the word would have been a rope, as impossible as for a rope to go through the eye of a needle. But without those two dots, the word rope is camel. And so it is, you can imagine, if you will take some words and change vowels in them, you'll soon find you have different meanings in your writing. At any rate, before 500 BC, all teaching was through word of mouth with the aid of some few manuscripts. And these manuscripts were written by scribes and then copies made and sent to other convents or monasteries. And there were very few convents then, it was mostly monasteries. Religion was not considered to be for women in those days. As a matter of fact, it was not even during the Master's time was it considered right for women to be in religion. Religion was strictly a man's business, and there was a great deal of resentment during the Master's time when women were allowed to be somewhere near the party. And you'll find in Paul's writings that he heartily disapproves of women in religion. And it's very clear where they belong. Of course, that's been reversed. You go from one extreme to the other. And today, religion is a woman's game, and man hardly belongs. Well, man belongs in the counting house now, providing the religion. Well, even as truth began to penetrate the consciousness of these religious people, they found it very difficult to impart to the ordinary attendants, let's call them church attendants, because these attendants, as it proved, were more interested in what they could get from religion than in religion itself. They were more interested in what God could do for them than they were in merely God. And so it became the natural thing for people to, the religious people, to withhold what they knew and merely discuss it among themselves in the monasteries. And then, of course, as a person, usually a young man, found himself to be of religious or spiritual bent, he gave up the ordinary ways of life or business of life, went into the religious work, became a rabbi or priest or worker in the temple, and of course received impartations of truth. But this was always by degrees. Never was anyone told the real truth, let us say, in the first or second or third year of their study. They were led up to it gradually. That's why they had titles like initiate and disciple and, as in Masonry, entered apprentice and fellow craft, all different titles showing what degree of wisdom you had attained or what degree of truth had been imparted to you. And of course the deeper secrets were only for those on top. You can see this in Hebrew scripture, where no one was permitted to go to the Ark of the Covenant except the high priest. No one else ever got there. Now why was this? Because it was taught in the Hebrew teaching of that day that God itself was in that Ark of the Covenant. In that very Ark was God. And that is why when the Hebrews were in battle, if they lost their Ark, they always lost the battle, because they lost God. God was taken away from them in that Ark. Now, of course, Moses understood the truth. So when he went up to the mountain to talk to God, he took no one with him but Aaron, because only Aaron was capable of knowing that you could talk to God without seeing a man out here. Had the others been there to witness Moses' experience, they would have said, that's a fake. We were there and we didn't see God. And so these inner truths were not revealed to those who could not understand them, who could not, you couldn't expect them to, you couldn't hope them to. Later we read in Scripture, if you raise them from the dead, they would not believe. And it's true today. How many wonderful metaphysical healings have taken place, and then the doctor said afterward, well, it was a wrong diagnosis. Oh, well, it was a shadow on the plate, or it was something else. But how can you expect the doctor trained in his particular art to believe in what would be called a miracle, which we understand to be something normal and natural? How many even ministers today say that spiritual healing was for Jesus' day but not for today? Why? Because it doesn't come within range of their consciousness, and they cannot imagine it. And so if they saw the lump disappear in front of their eye, they would be sure that either the lump had been an optical illusion, or the forces of nature were now at work, whereas they hadn't been before. And so you see, it was very carefully kept. These spiritual secrets were very carefully kept. And we come to the day of the Master, and he is much freer in talking about the spiritual mysteries. That was one reason why he incurred the displeasure of the church, because he was revealing to people things they had never been told before. He was, well, you remember the shocking thing that he said to them? No more shall ye worship in Jerusalem, nor in this holy mountain. Well, you know that to say that in those days was to tell, like telling a Roman Catholic, you mustn't go to Rome, or you mustn't go to Boston. It's a shocking thing, because we know that God is in Rome, and we know that truth is in Boston, and so you make your pilgrimages. And in the East, of course, the pilgrimage was to Mecca. You had to go to Mecca. Well, now, here is the great Master saying, no more shall you worship in this holy mountain, nor yet in Jerusalem, but in spirit and in truth. Now, where is spirit and where is truth? How are you going to localize those? Where are you going to find them? It's like saying, and he hangeth the world on nothing. That isn't explaining a thing to the human mind, nor is it explaining how you can worship God when you have no place to go to worship him, and you have no ceremony or rite or creed, because you mustn't go to Jerusalem, nor to the holy mountain, but in spirit and in truth. Now, if that passage alone were understood, religion would be lifted up to its very highest peak. If only that one passage were understood, that we are to worship God in spirit and in truth, why would this lift us to the absolute top of religious understanding? Because you'd have to say to yourself, all right, where is spirit and where is truth? And how do you worship in spirit and how do you worship in truth? And you'd soon find no one could tell you. And that would drive you back to yourself. And then you'd find that you couldn't look in books and find it, and you couldn't hear it in sermons, and so you'd begin asking questions of yourself. You'd be turning within and saying, how do I worship in spirit? How do I worship in truth? Where is this spirit and truth that I worship in? How is it accomplished? Do I go someplace? No. He says you don't go anyplace. Well, you mean it's where I am. And you would begin introspection. You would begin what would develop into meditation. And then an answer would come from within your own being, and all of a sudden you'd find you were worshiping in spirit and in truth, and you'd know then that it could be done just as well in a hotel room that maybe last week was used for a cocktail room. Wouldn't make any difference. You still can worship in this hotel room, and if necessary in the cocktail lounge upstairs. It makes no difference where you worship. It is that you are worshiping in spirit and in truth, not in a building, not in a room, but in a state of consciousness. Now, that was harmful in those days, just like at the beginning of World War II. The slogan of that day was, what can I do to help? Meaning, what can I individually do to help this war effort? And of course everybody had an answer. You could go to the war plant and work, or you could enlist, or you could join the Home Guards or Salvation Army and bake crullers, donuts. But in my meditation it came, I know what we can do. We can pray. We can pray without ceasing. We can pray wherever we are. It doesn't make any difference whether we go to the war plant or to war, or the Home Guards, or cooking crullers in the home. We can pray, and prayer is more effective than bullets. And so I wrote an article, and but the subject wasn't through, so I wrote a second and a third and a fourth. I thought, that's an idea. That's wonderful. And I began to share that with my patients. I was then a practitioner. So the thought came, but why can't everybody pray? So I went down and met the editor of the Boston Herald, which is a Protestant newspaper and a Republican newspaper. And I showed the editor these articles and said, what do you think? And he looked and said, that's the first time I've seen a religion I could believe in. He said, I could go for that. He said, I can't go for church. I can't go for the things they teach. That I can go for, that I can pray wherever I am, and that my prayer is just as effective. Oh, yes, he said. How many can you turn out of these? Short ones every day. All right, I would like 5 every week as long as the war lasts. And this will really help people to get some consolation and to be a help, because I do think that if people were united in prayer, no matter what the form of prayer, something would happen. You come back Thursday morning and I will have a contract for you. And I came back Thursday morning and he had my manuscripts ready to hand back to me. And he said, I'm sorry, we can't have them. Why? Well, the directors, the board, says no, the Catholic Church doesn't approve. You say that you can pray outside of church, and they don't want that in the newspaper. And they never appeared. The only circulation they had was among my patients. Now, the Hebrew church had that same feeling. When the Master said, you don't have to pray in Jerusalem. Well, you know, everyone went to Jerusalem every year and brought tithes with them. Oh, the take must have been good. It must have been as good as a Jack Dempsey prize fight. And here's this man saying that isn't necessary. Not only that, but he told them something else. God has no pleasure in those sacrifices. God has no pleasure in killing of animals and sacrifices and birds. He threw the money changers out of the temple. You see, the highest spiritual truth was known to those inside. What Jesus was teaching was not unknown to Hebrew rabbis. But it wasn't good for the people. Well, for many, many years, it puzzled me about this attitude, because I am not one of those who believe that church people, I mean by that the ministers and hierarchy and so forth, are actually all materialists and in it for money. I do believe that in every generation and in every religion there will be found some of a grossly material nature, and whose idea is how many seats can we fill at so much per seat. But I do not believe that that is the normal attitude of church people, of the ministry and the higher-ups in the church. And so I was puzzled as to why spiritual truth hasn't been made more available to all of the world. Now, you will find in religious literature that it is said to be careful of what truth you give people, because it can be dangerous. A little learning is a dangerous thing, and more especially applied to spiritual truth. I never could understand that, because how can a knowledge of God, no matter how little it would be, how could that be dangerous? But as these years have unfolded, I've caught a glimpse of what was meant by not being too quick to give the real, absolute spiritual truth to the masses. Lately, we've had one experience that bears this out. A profound spiritual truth is this: God never punishes. And you see, one of the first effects that it had on an unprepared thought was for a man to write a book that you can do all the sinning you want because God doesn't punish you. He doesn't even know about it. You see, there was a little bit of knowledge that was dangerous because it wasn't followed up with a complete truth, which is God doesn't punish, but the sin does. The evil does. And most people, the moment they're released from a fear of God, all of a sudden stop worshiping God. Well, if God isn't going to punish me, why should I go to church? Nothing's going to happen anyhow. In other words, there is a wrong response when you only give a person a little bit of truth here and there and do not complete the entire picture. Now, when you hear that it isn't good to give the full spiritual truth to anyone, remember that there is this about it. It is true that there is no use presenting some little thing which may be complete truth to a person who yet has no background for assimilating it. For instance, supposing, as many of our metaphysical friends do, you have a friend or relative who has no metaphysical background and they're sick, and you go to them and say, "Oh, it isn't real. What are you worried about?" Do you see what trouble you are causing to tell a person, no, it isn't real. Disease is not a reality. If it were a reality, it would have a law. If it had a law, it would be eternal. And then you could never get rid of it. Anything that's real is eternal. For instance, 2 times 2 is 4 is real. You see that? You can't destroy that. You can't change it. You can't do anything with it. You must accept it as it is. Or the law of like begetting like is real. You can't ever get pineapples from papaya seeds because there is a law of like begetting like. And that law is real. It's unchangeable. Do you see? All right. If disease were real, it would be unchangeable. You couldn't ever get rid of it. You couldn't ever turn a fever into a chill. You couldn't ever turn a healthy person into a sick one or a sick one into a well one. If disease were real, it would have a law to maintain it and to sustain it. Now, if I say that to you, you can understand that because you have this surrounding teaching. In other words, you have it explained to you what we mean by reality. And so you're ready to agree. Well, of course, in that sense then, disease, no matter what its appearance, and no matter how prevalent it seems, it can't be real, it can't be eternal, or it couldn't be cured. But think what you do to a person who has no knowledge of what you mean by real, and then say to them, when they're virtually dying of some disease, that it isn't real. All you do is bring out a reaction of opposition and resentment rather than helpfulness. Well, now, it is in this same way that the religious teaching grew up of punishments for failure to comply. It was only because, more especially in those early days, there was no way to convey to the mass mind that there is no God of punishment, but that your violation itself brings the punishment. And they say, well, I don't understand anything about that. As long as there's nothing up here that's going to punish me or know about it, I'll take my chances with it. Now, with the advent of printing presses and later radio, it was possible to prepare the human thought to come up and up and up, higher and higher, to where it can now perceive things. And I'll show you the difference even in the Roman Catholic Church, where a few weeks ago Bishop Sheehan made so bold as to tell 10 million listeners that there's no use of praying the prayer of petition, that it's not good prayer. At best it is secondary, but really it's not worthwhile. And he also told them that there is no use praying to God for material things. That when you pray, pray only for spiritual things. Now, can you imagine that being told to the masses 10 years ago or 20 years ago? No. No one would have understood what he meant by praying only for spiritual things or giving up the prayer of petition. What does a church person know except the prayer of petition? And here is a man of the church saying, now, when you go back into the Roman Catholic religion, you'll find a great miracle and mystery. Their real religious teaching is founded to a great extent on the revelations or writings of St. John of the Cross. And virtually everything that we know about meditation and contacting God is in those writings. And it is the textbooks for teaching in the Roman Catholic priesthood. Their books of St. John of the Cross is authoritative. They accept it as authority. And all these things that we know today about meditation and turning to the Father within are in those writings. Yet how many of the Roman Catholics know that? Now, more who can remember what Bishop Sheehan said will commence to puzzle. What did he mean? Don't use the prayer of petition and don't pray for material things. We've always gone to God and the saints to get a house or to get a dress or to get a job or to get safety. Well, that is merely the beginning of a trend. You watch what will happen 10 years from now in their radio cast when their people begin to understand there is no use of praying to God for something, that is, using the prayer of petition. And so you see a profound spiritual truth will have been given to the masses that never before could have been given because there was no preparation for it leading up to it. Now, it is the same with the word God. In the Old Hebrew Testament you will find God said. Of course, that made it so. God said. Well, you know, God said that we shall not eat shellfish. God said we shall not eat meat of the pig. God said we shall not marry the citizens of our neighboring country. All these things is credited to God said. Who is this God who says that a cow is all right and a pig isn't? Who is this God that says this fish is all right to eat, but not that fish is all right to eat? But how else could you reach the mind of the illiterate, the uneducated, except with some authority? And they wouldn't accept the authority of man unless it was clothed in an army. Yes, if Moses had had a police department, he could have enforced the law of not eating pig meat or the law of not eating shellfish. But he had no police department, and they wouldn't obey him, and so it becomes God said. Now, to a great extent, all of us have been victims of that statement, God said. And we have accepted these things that God said, and we have obeyed them as if a God really said them. Now, what is behind the statement God said? What did Moses know that the people didn't know that enabled him to use a term like God said. What actually did Moses mean by God said? I know today cosmic law says, do not try to grow orchids in New York, at least in your garden in New York, because orchids won't grow in your garden in New York, because there is no law to support such growth. Everything in the New York climate is antagonistic to orchids. Therefore, to try to grow orchids in your garden in New York would be to try to violate a law of nature. And it can't be done. You'll have loss after loss after loss if you try it. Well, in the same way, cosmic law says that if you eat meat or fish, it must be fresh. If it isn't, the chemical change in it that makes it poisonous will react on your body. And so cosmic law gives you food to eat, but not poison food to eat. Well, in the days I'm speaking of, they had not yet come upon Frigidaires. And so shellfish and the meat of pig spoiled almost within a few hours after bringing it forth. The meat of the cow and the meat of the lamb did not spoil so readily. It lasted much longer, at least till you could use it up. But you never could save over shellfish or the meat of a pig, even from one meal to the next, without it spoiling. And so cosmic law says if you are in a hot climate like that without refrigeration, do not eat this, because it will have a bad reaction upon you. Now, when you violate cosmic law and put poison into your system, you're not putting food into your system. You are in violation of food. And so the violation of that law must produce sickness. Now, God does not punish you by sending sickness because you eat shellfish in a hot climate, but cosmic law says you may eat food but not poison. Now, these are minor things leading up to the major subject. The truth about cosmic law is this: love is the fulfilling of all law. And so cosmic law is really love in action. Now, it is as poisonous to put hate, envy, jealousy, resentment into yourself as it is to put poisoned pig meat or shellfish into yourself. It is a violation of the same law, a cosmic law. The cosmic law is fulfilled through love. Now, I can say to you that so far as any God is concerned, go and sin all you want, because there isn't anyone keeping track of your sins who going to do anything to you. But I'll tell you this: there may not be a God watching you, but there is a law. And the moment you violate the law, you are under condemnation. Now, nothing personal about it. It doesn't make no difference what country you're in or who the person is that you violate. What has to do is the law. Now, we want to analyze that very carefully, because our lives can only be spiritually led as we maintain ourselves in conformity with the cosmic law of love. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love is the fulfilling of the law. do unto others as you would have others do unto you. All of this, you see, is cosmic law. It wasn't given us by Jesus. Remember that this love thy neighbor as thyself is in the book of Leviticus. That's a long, long time before Jesus. And it is in other scripture long before it ever was in the book of Leviticus. So remember that we are not dealing with a person's teaching. It doesn't make a difference what person's teaching you violate. Only be sure you don't violate a teaching that is cosmic law. Now, love thy neighbor as thyself is a cosmic law. Love in its entirety is a cosmic law. The moment you violate love, you violate cosmic law, and you bring the action of condemnation upon yourself. Now, I'm going to illustrate this again with a simple thing, and that is the traffic law. The traffic law is something that most people are continuously fighting. If not physically, they're mentally fighting it. And why? When it is one of the greatest blessings that ever has come into modern American life. It ranks with great spiritual teaching, traffic law. Why? And now let's follow it and see. Here is a busy business street. And the law says 20 miles an hour. But the law also says that if you're going to make a right-hand turn, come the furthest over to the right-hand curb that you can get when you make it. But it says that if you make a left-hand turn, go to the center of the road where you have the full view of everything and make a left-hand turn from there. Don't cut over on the left and get in the way of oncoming traffic. Don't go over on the right and get in the way of that traffic. Go to the center of the road and make your turn. Now watch how wonderful this is, that if you continuously obey that, your car and yourself are always under such control, not only that you can't have an accident, but if somebody else is violating it, you have time and you have control really to get out of trouble without them coming at you. In other words, you cut down to the barest fraction the possibility of accident just by an obedience to the traffic law. Now, what happens when we violate it? Sometimes the cop comes and the judge. And then pretty soon we're mad at the cop and we're mad at the judge. And why? They didn't do a thing. We did. We violated the law. They were instruments carrying out the punishment which we brought upon ourselves. They had nothing to do with our punishment. They weren't interested in us. They were only interested in violations. When they saw violations, they were instruments of the law. Now, you watch how wonderful it is that as long as you keep in conformity with the traffic laws, that you practically reduce the danger of accident to an almost minimum, almost nothingness. Life is exactly the same. There is a law of life, and we call it cosmic law, but its nature is love. Now, as long as your actions conform to love, and not one standard of love, love at every level, mother and child love, and child and parent love, brother and sister love, and husband and wife love, and community love, and national love, and international love, as long as we are conforming to the law of love in our relationships, from ourselves up to our international world, we are under the grace of cosmic law, and nothing can in any wise come near your dwelling place, Tom. There can be all kinds of evil in the world, just like there can be all kinds of traffic cops on the road. They will not bother you while you are not in violation. And so there may be all kinds of punishment in the world, and all kinds of trouble in the world, it will not come nigh your dwelling place. That is why the Master gave us the Sermon on the Mount, to show us what cosmic law is. Now, the closer that we can come to abiding in the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount, the more we are conforming to the cosmic law. It has nothing to do with any God up there. It has to do with you and your relationship to a law of love. Supposing you were planting a garden, would you dare plant it in opposition to the law of nature that governs your garden? Would you give your crop the wrong kind of fertilizer? Or no fertilizer? Would you give it no water? Why, no. If you have a plant that requires a lot of sunshine, you plant it where it can get the most sunshine. If you have a plant that will not take much sun, you plant it where it will not get much sun. If nature is doing it, you will find that nature plants certain vines and trees and plants under the protection of trees where it won't get too much sun. It plants other things way out in the open where it'll get the full benefit of the sun. Now, it isn't possible to violate those laws. Fishermen cannot violate the laws either. They must have certain bait for certain fish. They must go to certain places at certain seasons of the year. Supposing they decided to fish in the wrong place in the wrong season of the year, they get punished. Their punishment would consist of an expense and a lot of labor and no fish. So with us. We do not have to be concerned with any God that is to reward us, nor any God that is to punish us. We have to be concerned with, ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. What is the truth about cosmic law? What is the truth about love fulfilling the law? Now, as you study your Sermon on the Mount, as you study your Ten Commandments, as you study the teachings of the Master, you will find this, that life is indestructible. Life is immortal, self-sustaining, as long as you are under the grace of love. The moment you remove yourself from it, you bring about your own destruction. That is why the Hebrew Testament, if it were understood from the standpoint of spiritual law, cosmic law, would not sound as stupid as it sounds. It seems terrible in there to find God fighting this people this time and being on their side the next time, until you stop to realize that it only means that the people have brought themselves back under the law of love, and now God is on their side. They violated the law of love, and now God is against them. When you translate the word God and take it out of the sky and out of the man with a beard and make it a cosmic law, you'll find that it is as loving, gentle, and kind as a traffic law. And there isn't anything nicer in the world than a good traffic law, because you can abide under it and be virtually assured of freedom from accident. You say, well, once in a while some drunk will get in your way and so forth and so on. I doubt very much that happens to those who continuously keep themselves under the grace of obedience. Yes, there's the word again, obedience. All through Scripture you'll find the word obedience or obey. Now you see, it doesn't tell God what to do, it tells us what to do. Be in obedience. Obey. Obey. Obey this cosmic law, and none of these evils will come nigh you. The responsibility is upon our shoulder to obey. First to learn what the truth is, then to obey it. Now, in our practice, we make use of all the helps that we can get that will bring us back to the grace of cosmic law. For instance, if we have been chronic violators of the traffic law, it's not a bad thing to put a sign up in the windshield there, obey the traffic law, and then when you catch yourself disobeying it, let that give you a reminder and bring you back into line. Now, religious history has the same thing. We have the books to read, we have our meditations, we have lectures, or we have classes. All of these things serve to bring our minds back into line. In ancient days, they had other ways, and these other ways, some of them, which were very good, have had to be discontinued because of the abuse of them. And I was reminded of that when I saw this on Daisy's neck, because this is one of the ways they used to have that was so very wonderful that has had to be discontinued because of the abuse. These are Chinese discs, revolving wheels. And a few hundred years ago, these were carved in China. And the people would carry one in their purse or around their neck or in their pocket. And every once in a while, they let their hand go to it, touch it, and that would be a reminder to think about God. That would be their reminder to think, oh. And that thought would bring them back, I have nothing to fear now. I remember, I have God. So this served as a reminder. And rarely did you find a Chinese family in which each member of the family didn't have one of these. And of course, the fine carved ones like this were for the upper 10, but there were others for the lower 5. And but everyone had this. Now, there was nothing evil about this and nothing superstitious, except that as time went on, people got to believing that if they carried one, it was good luck, or if they touched it, it was good luck, and they transferred the power from the remembrance of God to the disc. And you see, finally, it had to be discontinued because it's called paganism now to have one of these, because while you're worshiping that, or you're believing that it's going to do something for you. Well, now, if you rightly understand this, it's a wonderful thing, because you just stick your hand in your pocket, and no matter what you're doing during the day, you say, it's all right, God's on the job. It's your reminder of God. It's another reminder to enable you to acknowledge Him in all His ways. Now, later, the Christians copied this idea. They formed or manufactured crucifixes, some with the figure of the Master on the crucifix, and some with just the plain crucifix. And they carried them in the purse, or they wore them around their neck. Now, there was nothing wrong about that. The idea was to remember the crucifixion, or to remember the Master, to remember the crucifying of one's faith in the external and bringing back one's faith to the invisible Christ, to the invisible presence. And that was a marvelous thing. It would be a wonderful thing if everybody in this world either had one of these or had a crucifix or had the Hebrew 6-pointed star. Anything that would serve as a reminder, God's on the field. But you see the danger. Mazzetti quotes the Catholic girl who says, I have lost my crucifix and I have nothing left but Christ. She was forlorn. Without the crucifix, she was lost. But now you see, the moment we transfer faith in God to our reminder, we are in trouble. In Japanese homes, they have these wonderful, many Japanese homes, they have these wonderful little figures of temples and altars and so forth with figures on them. Now, many people, the whites, the Howleys especially, look on that as a form of paganism because they think that they're worshiping that little temple or the little figurines that are in the temple. And there may be some superstitious enough to be doing just that. Just like there are Christians who are foolish enough to be worshiping a statue of Jesus Christ or Mother Mary or St. Anthony or something else, instead of seeing the symbology of it. Now therein comes the danger of giving a spiritual truth to people. Here is a wonderful spiritual truth. Every time you see this or feel it, or your crucifix, remember God is really the power in your life. Yes, that's fine for you. But then one generation removed from you, and somebody says, oh, I've got my mother's crucifix, and she always had good luck with it. So you see that giving spiritual truth to the unprepared thought would be like giving this to somebody without their having an innate knowledge that this isn't a power. This isn't going to do anything for you, except if it serves to remind you in the midst of a busy day that God is. I had to stop this fellow over here. Don Blandy and I were at breakfast one morning, and out of that breakfast came a wonderful illumination, and it was on the word is. All of a sudden, that is lived as it had never lived for me before, and I'm sure it certainly hadn't for him. But from that moment on, it was so clear to us that is, and there's no use praying about it or trying to change anything or do. If it's true, it already is. Yes, but Mr. Blanding wanted to show me how deeply grateful he was, and so he went out and had a gold figure made for me with the words IS on it. Well, that was fine, because as far as I'm concerned, when I see it, I think of a jug of syrup that brought it forth into being. And I can smile and say, yes, it is syrup. I guess I won't pray to God about it. But you see, the danger was that Don thought it would be a good idea for some others, and he told them about it, and the first thing you know, they had charms with is on it. Now you see, that's bad. That's bad. You can't do that. You can't give them a half a truth. If you don't give them the whole story, and the danger is that if they have the whole story, they'll give an is to somebody else without the whole story, and again we'll be back in superstition. You see that? Now, so it is with everything. I have read with a great deal of interest and over a long period, so as to really know what was in it, the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And if you would know, all these symbols that we worship today are back there with them. Every one of the symbols, the crucifix and all of them. And another interesting thing, I came across a manuscript one time that is dated more than 500 B.C. And it has the story of an Egyptian named Jesu, who was called upon by a woman named Mary to raise from the dead her brother Lazarus. And she had another sister whose name was Martha. Well, there's nothing new under the sun. You see, there are cosmic laws, and the Chinese people bring the reminder of that cosmic law to you through this wheel. The Japanese bring this reminder of the presence of God in their little temples in the home. The Hindus bring this reminder of God to us by each home having a little corner with a table or a little whatnot on which is either a photograph or a statue of one of their saints. And every day the Hindu brings to it either fresh flowers or fresh fruits or fresh vegetables and places it on there. Why? As a symbolic offering of himself and of his goods to God. There's nothing paganistic about it. It's a beautiful idea of sacrifice. Why take some animals and cut their throat when you can just as well offer up a turnip and then eat it later? Now, you see then that when you think of everything in cosmic terms, you will see that there is a rightful use for forms of worship, ceremonies, creeds, if only you will interpret them as carrying you back to God, not having any value in and of themselves. Now you will understand what Jesus meant when he said, "Ye shall worship him in spirit and in truth." Now carry your star with you, or your crucifix with you, carry your wheel with you, or anything you like, or burn incense or light a candle, as long as you see it symbolically reminding you of the light which is God. Do you see that? Now, every cosmic law is based on love, and one of those is tithing. One person comes to you and they bring you some fruit, and they say it is our custom to give to a stranger the first fruits out of our garden. Somebody else comes with a check and says it is my custom to take from my income to give for a spiritual purpose, and always to give the first dollar, not what's left over. Now, another person, though, comes and says, but I send my check to an orphan asylum. And another one, what difference does it make? The idea behind it is love. Now, whether you're loving orphans, or whether you're loving a church, or whether you're loving, what difference does it make? Send care packages to Russia or Germany or England or wherever you like. The idea is love, is the fulfilling of the law. But of course, how do we know it's love? The first secret is, if whatever we're doing, we do in secret. That's the proof that it's love. If we do it openly, where men can praise it, or see it, or know about it, or put a little ad in the paper about it, that's no longer love. It's selfishness. And there's no virtue in it. No virtue. You can give away $1 million and have no virtue in it if somebody knows you've done it. That is the same with prayer. Prayer that is performed outwardly or openly isn't prayer at all, it's show-off. A prayer that is conducted jointly, as we do in this room, among ourselves only, where the world can't see and know, is a gathering together in one place of one mind in the name and nature of God. That differs entirely than walking down the street on Easter Sunday with a new bonnet and saying our prayer, or going to church on Thanksgiving morning and all getting together, and so everybody knows we've been to church and done our duty. No. The first part of love in religion is its secrecy. Unless one's religion is a secret underground, it isn't a true religion, because there is self in it. And true religion can't have self in it. A cosmic thing has no personality any more than the law of like begetting like. You must remember that you cannot get pineapples from orchids, because there is a law of like begetting like. Now, there's nothing personal about it. That is a law. You can't get black from white or white from black, but when you mix white and black, you get a combination of white and black, because there is a law of like begetting like. Nothing personal about it. Anyone who comes into that law, drop a book, the law of gravity takes over, but you might have a $10,000 piece of glassware, and if you drop it, the law is going to take over and smash it too. In other words, there's nothing personal about the law, and yet there is something warm, something tender, something loving in watching the law fulfill itself, and see how, as you bring yourself into at one-ment with it, the harmonies appear in your outer life.